Firstly, Paul, obviously, I think most people will have seen the announcement by the club around about 5:30 this evening on the refunds. But can you give us a bit of an explanation on that, how it came about, and just break down the detail for those that perhaps haven't yet seen that for season ticket holders and 1901 club members?
Sure. First of all, good evening, everyone. Thanks for joining us tonight. I think the first thing to say is that we've been looking at the refund situation pretty much from the end of last season, and we've been trying to second guess what the government were going to do with fans returning to the stadium. And the most important thing was to try and strike a balance between keeping the normal season ticket process working and making sure, from a club's point of view, we had the sufficient income and cash flow to run the business as normal. And secondly, trying to be fair to fans as far as we could be by trying to second guess what was going to happen with the fans returning to games. So that's why we had the payment holiday, to try and help people through the worst of the pandemic initially. We then looked at the start of the season and started working towards an October return for fans to come into the stadium, which was only going to be a couple of weeks after the start of the season. So it seemed entirely sensible and reasonable to keep our powder dry on any refund policy over and above what we've done with payment holidays and so on. And then, of course, the government put back the return of fans in October, and so we had to rethink that. We always knew that we had a board meeting scheduled for today and yesterday in the international break, so we took that as our opportunity to prepare some proposals for the board to consider. And then in between time, we had the added complication of the Premier League's decision on pay-per-view, which came on Friday, and we would have only had probably 4 or 5 hours notice more than the fans of what to expect from that. So we had to digest that information as well, build that into our proposals, and we took those proposals to the board, and we've made the announcement on refunds tonight.
And just touching on the pay-per-view, because I know that's been a very sort of emotive subject, shall we say, over the past few days. Is it literally that case? I mean, I know the answer to this, Paul, so it's a bit of a leading question, but you're literally getting that information just a few hours before the fans and having to make a decision and a judgment call on effectively what sounds like it was Hobson's choice. Either you can have the pay-per-view or you can't have the pay-per-view, and this is the price.
Yeah, unfortunately, I totally understand why people would not like it. I certainly don't like the price. I don't like where we are with this situation. What we're trying to do is make the best of a bad situation. So it's a complex situation for the Premier League. They've sold a certain number of games for Sky and for BT, and later in the year for Amazon. And those games carry a premium because they are exclusive to those broadcasters for that period of time. And when you start then to look to broadcast more games or all games live, it becomes a very complicated process because the broadcasters already paid a premium to have a certain number live, and now we want them to pay effectively for all of the games live and all of the costs associated with that. So in that situation, it's quite complex for the Premier League to try and keep the broadcasters happy, keep the clubs happy, and keep the fans happy. And what we eventually got down to was a situation where we either had a choice of those games being on pay-per-view or simply not being broadcast at all. And it's really important to understand that the football clubs and the Premier League don't have any kind of say in the pricing. If we did, then we'd be acting as a cartel. That would be illegal, and the competition authorities would effectively then investigate and sanction very severely those involved. So it's really important for everyone to understand we don't have a say in the pricing. We can't go back to the broadcasters and tell them what price we want it to be. It's their business that they're dealing with, and our business is actually putting on football matches. And I know that some people hate the term product in that situation, but that's how the broadcasters see it. They're buying our product. Our product is our football matches. We don't talk like that in terms of the football club. But when we talk in the business of football, that's exactly what it is. It's a product that we're selling, or the Premier League is selling on our behalf to the broadcasters. In our term, it's a football match, and that's what we do. And we only have two ways to sell our football match. We can either sell it through the Premier League to broadcasters, or we can sell it directly to our fans through ticketing. We can't do the latter at the moment. We can't do that. So our only alternative is to actually get more games broadcast. Our personal view, mine and Tony's and the Brighton Hove Albion board, is it's far better for us to vote in favour of fans being able to see their team play than to vote against, which would actually prevent fans from seeing their team play. Unfortunately, we don't get a say in the price, so we simply have to vote as we see it. Other clubs may see it differently, but I would rather defend to our fans voting in favour of them being able to have the choice of seeing every single game, knowing that we would actually make a refund or a rebate in order to support the cost of that, than actually having to stand here or sit here and try and defend voting against fans seeing games that they couldn't otherwise see in the stadium.
And one thing you've mentioned there, obviously, is one way you can bring income into the football club is bums on seats. What's the latest situation on that? Because it's a very differing picture across the UK. And while we might argue it's relatively safe or very safe even for fans to come here to the Amex and watch games of football, that isn't the case across the UK, I guess. But what's the latest on fans coming back in, Paul?
I think the first thing to say is, we've got to be mindful that it's a pretty difficult time for a lot of people with the virus in certain parts of the country. And the one thing we're not going to do in any way, shape or form is be reckless or in any way put people's health in any kind of danger. So whilst we're pushing very hard for fans to come back into the stadium safely and as soon as possible, what we're not going to do is do that if in any way it puts people's health in danger. So from our point of view, we'll continue our lobbying. We're frustrated with the government. There have been a number of inconsistent messages that have been given out. You've got situations where the Royal Albert Hall can sell tickets to an event with a 50-60% capacity. The O2 can sell tickets to a concert with thousands of people likely to attend. We've got the Royal Opera House that can do similar. All of those events indoors, all of those events relying on public transport to get to and from the venue. And yet in a football stadium where we've already proven, even with 2,500 people, that we can put on the event safely with no effect whatsoever on the infection rate in this part of the world, with lots of parking if people required it. We had ample parking for the test event, and yet we're still prevented from doing that. And at the same time, what that does is it adds pressure to not just our football club, but every football club, because we simply can't bring in money from our secondary revenue stream, again, to use business speak, if you like, from tickets being sold to fans. And, that's frustrating for us. It's frustrating for fans that write to me almost every single day saying, when can I come back and watch games at the Amex? And it's frustrating for the whole industry, because I think it would be a lot easier for us to help clubs further down the pyramid if we had our own income back to some kind of regularity than simply to be in this situation now where we can't do that. And we're in a catch-22 situation. We haven't got enough income coming in to pay our own bills sufficiently without Tony's significant help. But at the same time, we're being asked to help others. It's really strange. It's a little bit like not being able to pay your own mortgage, but then being asked to pay your next door neighbour's mortgage. It's a very, very difficult situation. As much as you want to help your neighbour in trouble, you've actually got to look after your own family first. And we're in that situation at the moment.
Paul, you touched on indoor events there. Is there anything the club could do in terms of some of those fixtures, perhaps the away fixtures, where maybe you've obviously got the hospitality lounges that people will be aware of at the Amex? Game against Tottenham coming up later in the month, that will be one of those pay-per-view fixtures. Is there anything you can do around that to open the stadium?
Yeah, within, I think, probably 30 minutes of the Premier League meeting finish on Friday, as you know, Paul, because I think you were part of it, we were in a meeting, a group of us, looking at ways in which we could use the stadium to help fans that may or may not be able to afford a pay-per-view price to come into the stadium and watch the game collectively at a safe distance, in groups, meeting government guidelines. And not only just using our stadium, but also looking at other venues across Sussex to see if we could support other local businesses in our sector, perhaps the cricket club, perhaps cinemas, perhaps larger venues that can at the moment accommodate groups of people. So that was within half an hour of the Premier League meeting finishing, just trying to see if we could be creative about how we could open up the stadium. And maybe for away games, to create a bit of fun for the kids, we could do a drive-in football match, have a big screen in Bennett's Field and look at bringing people in groups in their cars to watch the game. We've got to be creative in these times, try and be a little bit different, try and be prepared to think outside the box and all those sorts of things that we might have to do to try and support the club and to try and keep engagement with fans and keep them involved with football at the times that we're used to coming to football. But secondly, as I said before, recognising not everyone is going to be able to afford, what is a high price for pay-per-view. I hope what we've done today, and as we've promised all the way through this crisis with refunds and rebates, that the majority of people now will be able to use the benefit of that extra cash in order to pay for the games that they want to see. But it's a short-term measure. We hope it doesn't go beyond October or November, that we're having to use pay-per-view for fans to see games. We hope we're going to start to get fans back in the stadiums before the end of the year. It seems unlikely at the moment, but 2 months is a long time in this virus. When people said to us back in April that we'd be playing Premier League football again in the middle of June, albeit behind closed doors, at that point it seemed impossible for us to even contemplate that. There were nearly 1,000 people a day dying. The NHS was completely overwhelmed. People were in lockdown, couldn't get to their offices, but we were being advised at that time by the government to prepare to play again in the middle of June. So that, I've got to say, I was one of the biggest sceptics of that actually happening and spoke against it at Premier League meetings, saying I thought it was crazy that we were even contemplating playing Premier League fixtures when 1,000 people a day were dying. But the reality was the government have got a much further and foresighted view of where this thing could go than we have. And if we get any indication before Christmas that we could have fans back in the stadium, we've got to be prepared and ready for that, as we are. And obviously that would be a marvellous thing. If that doesn't happen and we go into the new year, we've still got 11 games at home in the new year. And hopefully what we've done today is we've got the balance right between giving people some much needed cash now, which is important, and we've given them the flexibility, if it's not important for them, to leave it there, and if it becomes important, to take the money back at a later time, and hopefully enough cash left behind so that when we do get fans back in the stadium, let's say it's January, then through the ballot process, we hope that people will then be able to use that money to attend fixtures, and we go from there, and then hopefully things will then start to even themselves out. But we're having to make a number of judgments in real time, in really quick decision-making time. But at the same time, what we're not going to do ever is rush into a decision, because if we do and we haven't thought through all of the consequences, we could create a huge administrative burden for the club, which frankly at the moment would be difficult. We're still working 50% from home, 50% of the time. So we're having to manage the logistics of an organisation that isn't functioning, unfortunately, as normally as it would do. But at the same time, we don't want to refund too much money, start playing again, and then have to go back to fans and start asking for money again. And so originally our plan was to try and create the payment holiday to alleviate the immediate pressure, look at what might happen this year and collect enough money so that we had half a season's worth of money in our accounts, with a view to at least half a season's games being seen by everybody. As soon as that situation started to change, then we had to start thinking about, well, what is reasonable, what is fair? And the fairest thing to do is to put money back in people's pockets as quickly as we can, but not so quickly that if government policy changed back all of a sudden, we were then faced with a situation where we had to go back and collect money. So all of these things are a juggling act. They're not easy, and there's no script here. I'm not working from a plan that says, when this happened in 1984, this is what you do, or when this happened in 1999, this is what the best thing to do was. We are literally making this up as we go along, trying to be as fair as we possibly can to the fans, first and foremost, to Tony, because ultimately any cash flow impact for the club is really a cash flow impact on Tony personally, because that's the way the economics of our club runs at the moment. We're already running at a significant loss, but at the same time, trying to be operationally efficient, trying to be smart, trying to anticipate what might happen before it happens, but at the same time, trying to create flexibility to recognise that the most important people are the fans, their situations at the moment, people losing their jobs, people not having as much money as they hoped they would. And we planned the season ticket payment suspension in October so that during the worst months of the year in terms of finances, the winter months when fuel bills are higher, Christmas, New Year credit card bills, people wouldn't have monthly payments going out of their accounts at that time. But they still had enough credit that if the season suddenly kicked on again in January with fans back in the stadium, they would have enough credit in their account for them not to have to worry about payments, but they could still come to games. So we've tried to think this through logically, systematically, strategically, in terms of fairness to people, but it's really not easy. And I totally understand why when a pay-per-view announcement comes along, people suddenly go, whoa, hold on a second, you've got all of this money, you're holding all of this money, we can't get into stadiums. Now you want us to pay to see games that technically we think we've already paid for already. I totally understand why people would react to that. And that's why we always had planned during the international break, a board meeting to discuss this very subject. And the pay-per-view issue came about accidentally in many ways. We already had the board meeting planned for this week, but that happened to turn up on Friday, and we had to deal with that as well. So that's where we are, and it's a challenging time for everybody. But hopefully, we've got to a situation now where people feel there's a reasonable balance between getting some money back, being able to pay for games that they might want to choose to see on pay-per-view, or hopefully getting back into the stadium sometime sooner rather than later. But more likely, let's face it, it's going to be the new year.
That's great, Paul. There's a couple more questions I'd like to put to you before we take questions, but anybody's got a question, if they'd like to raise their hand, and then we'll get you on. So that'll be good. But one thing I want to ask you about, and I know you haven't commented, I'm not sure many other clubs have commented on, was the news that broke in the Telegraph on Sunday lunchtime regarding Project Big Picture, as it's been called. I think we'll all have our own opinions on it, but what's the club's stance on it? I mean, I think it's angered a lot of people. It does feel like a power grab, but what is the club's stance on it?
It's a power grab, and Tony and I are both astounded by what's come out, the way it's come out. The people that are alleged to have been involved in it, the lack of consultation with other clubs in the Premier League that are equal shareholders in the Premier League, shocked. And, you've got to look at it from someone like Tony Bloom's point of view. He's invested over £350 million of his own money in a football club that he loves, and in a football club that over the last decade we've worked to take from League One and a small converted athletics track, training at a university, to a world-class standard stadium with a world-class standard training ground, playing in the Premier League, doing our best to compete with clubs with incomes giant compared to ours. And here we are facing a situation where a group of people decide to put together a proposal that undermines the value of our football club, undermines our prospects of staying in the Premier League, undermines our prospects of getting back into the Premier League if we fall out. And we're expected to vote in favour of that. I mean, that's quite ridiculous, and we won't. So, that's our position. And yeah, we're in a situation where, the English football pyramid system is clearly not working. And we haven't forgotten where we came from. And we certainly haven't forgotten those clubs that are still there where we came from. And we want to do whatever we can to help them through a difficult period. But we can only do that by working together. We can only do that by looking after our business first, make sure that our club is secure, make sure our owner doesn't have to overcommit money at a time when everybody is struggling. Even wealthy people are taking a hit at the moment. Clearly, it's not hurting those people as much as it is ordinary people, but we've still got to remember that we've got a responsibility for 2,000 jobs in our football club, and our first priority is to them. But as I said before, we said, probably one of the only clubs on record to say this publicly, that we believe some form of support should be provided further down the pyramid. It's difficult to provide that support on a blanket basis when you've got clubs already in the Championship with wealthier owners than Tony. How does that work? How would Tony Bloom pass on money to someone wealthier than him to a football club that wants to actually replace us in the Premier League? How does that work? I don't know of another business in the world that would actually help fund their competitors to replace them in a market leading. It doesn't make any sense. So this is a really complex situation that we have to think through really carefully, not play out through the media, not play out through private clandestine meetings between a small group of people, but play out sensibly and openly, debate the issues, make sure everyone understands where all the self-interested parts are, and try and find some kind of solution that protects the sport that we love and the industry that we all work in. And that's something that doesn't happen through the pages of a national newspaper. Have
you spoken to your peers on the subject, Paul? Is there a genuine will to make that happen, and also what's the barometer with the other clubs? Do you think many are thinking and feeling, not wanting you to name names, but many are thinking and feeling the same way as you've just outlined?
I know they are. I know. If you look at the Premier League alone and you look at the plan in its basic form, it has the potential to benefit 9 clubs, and the 11 of us have to effectively vote for something that, it's a bit like turkeys sitting around and being told Christmas is coming and asking to vote for it. It's quite ridiculous. So, we're in a situation now where that gives all shareholders an opportunity to voice their views. It will be certainly an interesting meeting. I think any shortfall in ticketing revenue this year could be made up by selling tickets to tomorrow's meeting. But unfortunately, that can't happen.
I think you might get a few pay-per-view subscribers to that. I'd certainly be willing to part with £15 to watch it. But moving on, obviously, transfer window's just closed, or at least the global transfer window's just closed. The domestic window is still open. Final question for me, then we'll start to take some fans' questions. Pleased with the business that we've done. I'm guessing you'd echo the comments people may have heard from Dan Ashworth. And are we likely to see any more business?
Well, yes, we're very happy with what we did. It was a more difficult window than usual. I know it says that every window is difficult, and this one more so, because unfortunately, despite the headline numbers that you see in terms of 1.2 billion, I think it was, in terms of transfers in the Premier League, overall, the market was down 35%. And that's a massive drop relative to where football thought it was heading. Our own business was relatively modest. We did what we usually did. We looked to improve the squad in positions where we felt we needed to improve it. We wanted to make sure that the players we brought in were better than the ones we had or different to the ones we had. But what we won't do and what we'll never do is to simply spend money where there's pressure to spend it if we can't find the right player. And that is the same in what's left of this window in terms of the opportunities that still exist to do business in this particular time of year, as it did during the main window. If we can't find or agree the right price for the right player at the right time, we simply won't do the business. It's not a question of whether there's money there or not. The chairman's incredibly supportive at this time of year, as he is every transfer window. He's also got a mind on the future of the club as well as the present. So yes, we did a couple of pieces of business in terms of young players that we see as real prospects for the future. In terms of Moder and Kobonik, we've got 2 players that are already in the Polish national team, which is a terrific Polish national team. Virtually all of the players play outside of Poland, which is not the strongest league, but the players that play outside of Poland actually come together to form quite a formidable national team that we think will do exceptionally well in the tournaments ahead of us. And they are already part of that group. Okay, Kobonik has only played 1 game. It was a friendly, but he's got incredible future ahead of him. He's only 19 years of age. Moder's already an established part of that group and has incredible potential. He's still only 21. So we've invested for the future. Zakiri is another one that we think, although he'll come straight into us at this time, is a fantastic player that we've got a huge amount of confidence in and excitement about. And of course, earlier on in the window, we added the experience of Adam and Joel, who, again, even 24 months ago, the thought of Adam Lallana or a player from Ajax of the quality of Veltman coming in, who's played in Champions League semi-finals and played for Holland 25 times. Again, I think people would say, wow, this is where the club is beginning to make progress. And it's a combination, Paul, of building for the future and investing for the future while the price is right for us to do that. And at the same time, strengthening our current squad so that we can continue to move towards the vision of at some point in the future becoming a top 10 club. And those two things are not mutually exclusive in any way. They are a combined strategy to help the club move forward during this period. At the same time, we've also got to be careful because of the obvious situation of the income levels being down. So we're very, very lucky once again to have Tony, who continues to support us.
Enough from me. I think we've got Raymond Wright ready to come in with a question.
Hello, Raymond.
Can you hear me?
I can, Raymond.
Hi,
Fire
Raymond.
away.
Go for it.
Paul, firstly, thank you for all of that, and thank you for the exchange of emails yesterday. Much appreciated. If I can just stick with the big picture element, is there any way that one could add to the proposal that the two authors of it, Liverpool and Manchester United, I think should actually have some action taken against them? And I say this advisedly because people are going to start doing this unless one stands up and says enough is enough, and now, which is I think what you were implying, then they'll just go on doing it. And I feel that what they've done in the way they've done it is sort of try to do a theatrical thing of getting people to focus on one thing when they're really trying to do another.
I mean, listen, first of all, I always, in these situations, like to stand back and, first of all, hear for certain that our colleagues in the two red clubs in the northwest of England have been involved in these talks. So far, I've only heard from Rick Parry and his part in this plot. So let's, first of all, I always think, take a step back. Let's hear what they have to say. Let's hear what their explanation is. And then once they've given us that, then we can decide whether, they're guilty as charged or whether there's some kind of mitigation to their actions. But if indeed they're involved at all. So, let's see what tomorrow's meeting brings. As I said, I suspect that, we could sell a lot of tickets for people at the meeting. But, Tony and I always tend to let others speak first and listen to where the debate's going before we weigh in. And, always people are innocent before proven guilty. And at the moment, it seems that only Rick Parry's prepared to put his name to this Machiavellian plot. And by the way, this isn't something that was dreamed up on the back of a fag packet a week ago. The version of the plan that I've got is version 17. So that would suggest that it's been worked on for quite some time and in quite some detail. And, we'll see tomorrow whether anyone's prepared to own up to being part of those 17 versions or whether that's a mistype on the piece of paper that I've got.
Joanne, you are up next.
I just wanted to ask, with obviously I want to keep supplying my money to the club through the season tickets. When I said obviously you were talking about getting them refunded, would that mean that you then lost, if I asked for a refund, would that be for the games that we've missed that are at home now?
Well, what we're trying to do, Joanne, is we're trying to reduce the amount of credit that we hold for you down to a maximum of 25% of what you would have paid for the whole of this season. So let's just say, to keep it simple, you owed us £100 for the whole season. We're going to give you everything back apart from £25. Once we keep that £25, when we start playing again, we'll charge you against that £25 until it runs out. And if we're lucky enough to have you back in the stadium more times than the credit that you've got, then of course we'll come back and ask for the difference. But the most important thing is we want to get money back to you now, so that if you want to watch, for example, the pay-per-view games, you can. If you don't, then the money's yours, obviously, to do what you want with. But we've kept a little bit so that when we do start playing again, and please God, that is sooner rather than later, you're already on your way to paying for those games without us having to come back and ask for money immediately. Does that make sense?
We can go to Ian next. Ian Schiffer.
I'm here.
Hi, Ian.
Hi, Ian. Go for it.
Hi. Thanks for holding this meeting with us to explain how things are and what your thoughts are. I don't think I'll be paying the £15 because the problem with that also is the supporters of this club will lose out more because in general, less of the matches for Brighton are screened live by the Sky and BT. So we will have to end up paying more for someone like Liverpool would be screened more.
Yeah, I understand that, Ian. I think there's another way of looking at it as well, though, in that all of the pay-per-view revenue, whatever that amounts to, and by the way, I've seen some numbers in social media and in the newspapers that there's going to be 100 and 200,000 people per game watching every game on pay-per-view. Trust me, that isn't going to happen. The numbers will be much, much lower than that, and therefore the money that's generated is going to be much, much lower than that. But all of the money is going to be pooled. So if Manchester United get 200,000, for example, for their game against Newcastle, and we get 20,000 for our first game, then both of those go into the pool, and therefore potentially we will benefit disproportionately because we will get a bigger share of the overall pot, if you like, relative to what we put into it. But I totally accept that for fans, that doesn't really help because you're going to have to simply pay more actually to see more games. I totally understand that. And that's why initially we only agreed to do this in October and November, because if it does turn out to be entirely disproportionate, then clearly we're going to be going back and saying, look, this isn't working in the way that we hoped it would. But what I would say is, I heard someone say, well, what's going to happen is that everyone's going to, Sky are going to stop picking Manchester United and Liverpool and push it all to pay-per-view because they'll make more money from that. That again, isn't how we expect it to work, because Sky and BT both make their money primarily from monthly subscriptions and annual commitments. They don't really make their money from pay-per-view in this way for football. They're doing this, I don't want to say it's a favour because I don't think it's a favour, but they're doing this because the government have asked them and us to try and facilitate making sure that fans can still get access to games while they're being played behind closed doors. And we can't, as I've said several times, we can't keep doing that for free. It's not in our business model or in our business interest to give away the one thing that we can sell. As I said right at the start of this call, we can only really sell football matches to two specific stakeholders, broadcasters and fans. And if we're giving it away all of the time to broadcasters and to fans, then frankly, football doesn't exist at a professional level. So we're having to try and strike a balance. As I said before, I'm personally uncomfortable with the price. I think it's too high. I don't like it. I didn't have a choice. Would I rather vote for something that gives you access to all games if you want to see them and make sure you get a refund in order to fund that if you want to? Absolutely. Would I rather defend that than defend you not being able to see your team play for potentially 25, 26 games of the season? Absolutely. Because I think fans should have the right to see the games whenever they can.
That's another thing, because as you were saying, theatres, you can go into a theatre now, you can go and to watch someone perform. But supporters can't sit outside in a stadium, that they can sit inside in the theatre. That makes no sense from what they're saying. It makes
less sense when those theatres, in theory, could show our matches live on a screen that they could charge you to go and see, and we wouldn't get any benefit from that. So again, it really is a very strange and slightly sort of odd world at the moment that we're living in. But as I said before, what we're trying to do is just find that balance between protecting the interests of the club that you love and we all love, and the jobs that depend on it, and most, or as importantly, Tony's investment in it, but at the same time trying to give you access to games that, frankly, if we hadn't have voted in favour of pay-per-view, you wouldn't have actually seen until such time as the stadium's open. And even then, if they do open, we might be faced with a situation where 15 or 20 or 25% of you can come back, but 75% of you can't. So we've got another big decision to make at some point in the future about how we're going to cross that particular bridge as well. And that's not an easy subject either. So, we're in a very, very difficult situation here, as I said earlier, and we're really trying to navigate through it as best we can, trying to be fair to everyone. And I know from the outside looking in on Friday afternoon, because I can tell you exactly how many, I got 48 complaints to me personally about pay-per-view. And that, when I said it against 23,000 people, that's 1 in 500, or 23,000 season ticket holders, that 1 in 500 season ticket holders wrote to me. It's not a huge number, but it's a significant enough number for us to realise the strength of feeling. But I can tell you, of those 48 complaints that I received personally, 44 of them were complaining about the price, and only 4 of them about the principle of pay-per-view. Now that tells me that, in the scheme of things, what we did was the right thing to do in terms of voting for something that gives you access to games. But what it also tells me is that you don't like the price. But it's the one thing that we couldn't have any control over or even any say in.
Thanks for that question, Ian. Paul, one follow-up from me. Do you think there'd be the broadcasters will take into account the point that Ian raises throughout the season, so we might see a more even spread of games, or do you think they will continue to focus on the top end of the league?
It's a really good question, Paul. My honest opinion is that they will do what they've always done, because that's what sustains their business in the long term. If they start messing around with the fixtures so that their long-term subscribers get upset, then that's actually going to do them more harm than good in the longer term. So my gut reaction is
fair point. Yeah,
we'll continue to see the same pattern.
Yeah, understood. Stefan Page, if you would like to ask your question.
Yes, thank you. Can you hear me okay?
Yeah, go for it, Stefan.
Brilliant. Thank you. So just two quick fire ones for you, Paul, if you don't mind. Firstly, in terms of the actually getting the refund for the season tickets, is there any procedures or anything that needs to happen to go through that? Because obviously me and my partner at the moment are struggling through the COVID at the moment. So that's a massive kind gesture for you.
Let me answer that one first so that we don't lose it. So what will happen is, over the course of the next few days, the supporter services team are going to work through 23,000 different season ticket holders and work out what you're due to be refunded, take the 25% that we're going to hold, and then communicate with you what you're entitled to receive back, and then you'll receive a link by which you can claim that back, and then the refund gets processed. So, and we're doing it that way, partly because there are going to be many, many different scenarios for people. Some people took the payment holiday, some people don't, some people didn't. Some people are up to date with their payments. Some people have missed one or two payments. Some people have donated parts of last season's rebate into AITC. Some people haven't. So it's not as simple as a simple 23,000 people get this. And of course, there's different pricing levels for different season tickets and 1901. So we've got to work all of that out. Once that's worked out, you'll get a chance to get the link. If you want to take the money immediately, you can. And as I said before, if at some stage you decide you don't want to take the money immediately, but at some stage in the future you do, because your financial situation becomes even more difficult, then you'll be able to claim again at some point in the future when the timing suits you. So stand by, and the supporter services team will do that as quickly as they can, bearing in mind that's a huge amount of work. But at the same time, we'll get it done as quickly as we can.
No, brilliant. I appreciate that from the club as well. It's a very, very nice gesture from you guys. So I appreciate that.
It's your money, so we want to get it back.
No,
but at the same time, as I said before, we're trying to get that balance right between not giving it you back, then getting you back in the stadium and having to ask you it back again. That would be a bizarre situation for us.
No, I get that. And the second question is more of a football-based one for you, so you can get out.
I won't use the word product and I won't use the word business. How's that?
Yeah, that sounds good. So I just wanted to say, with all of our stuff we've done over the transfer window so far, I just wanted to ask a general question of, I know obviously you're happy with the business we've done so far, but is there any areas that you thought that we could have done something a little bit better with, or gain just an extra person in a position that you thought would have been a big asset for us going forward for this year?
You're talking about a striker, Stefan, aren't you? You're being very polite.
Do you know what? Funny enough, Paul, no, I'm not. I'm
actually not. Okay, all right.
But no,
I think the honest answer is that we went into the window with a number of particular positions that we felt we needed to strengthen, given the way Graham wants to play. So, obviously, we've seen how quickly Tariq has settled into the team, but at the same time, there might be times when we want to play a flat back four, for example, and therefore a more conventional right back like Joel Veltman might be better suited to us. There might also be times when we come up against teams, and I don't want to pick on West Brom, but let's just say West Brom or Burnley, maybe a better example, that are going to be more physical and bigger, and that we might need a more physical presence in the back four than Tariq can provide. And now Graham is always flexible and creative with his tactics, and sometimes it can be counterintuitive. So, when Burnley, for example, might be expecting Veltman to play, you might see Lamptey play, because that will put them in a slightly different position at their defensive end of the pitch than they might be expecting. So we were always looking to add someone like Joel. Joel can also play at centre-back. If you're playing three centre-backs, then again, it makes absolute sense to have extra cover in that area, particularly with Shane going off to Celtic as well. We wanted to add a little bit more in midfield. Obviously, Adam Lallana has come in to do that. He's much more of a creative midfielder, But as people would have seen in recent games, he can also play a slightly more holding midfielder role as well, a slightly deeper lying midfielder, and dictate play from there. And then, clearly up front, if you can add a 20-goal, 25-goal striker that can score 25 goals in the Premier League, then you'd do that if you could. But in Graham's world, there's a particular type of striker that he wants, and we weren't at this stage of the window able to find that right combination of that player, that type, that price, those wages, that availability right now. And all those things have got to come together, along with a player that wants to come and an agent that's prepared to help facilitate that move. Sometimes it all comes together and it happens. Sometimes parts of it come together and it doesn't happen. Sometimes parts of it come together at a later date and it can happen. And all of those things really go into the kind of thinking that we have in the transfer window. But as I said before, what we don't do is, if that doesn't come together, we then don't just go to the next best option because we think that that's what everyone wants us to do. Sometimes you have to, in football particularly, ignore the noise, ignore the sort of the chatter around, we need this, we need that, we've got to have this, got to have that, going to get relegated if we don't get this, going to get relegated if we don't get that. If we listen to all the chatter, not only will we be bankrupt, we'll probably be relegated as well. So we have to make sure that we stick to our plan. We have a very clear plan. These plans are developed over a period of years, not just months. And each window that goes by, we have a systematic way of working through what we need, where we think we can get it, how much we're prepared to pay. And if we can't, then we walk away and then we regroup and then we look to the next window to see if we can strengthen again. But Graham's very, very happy with what we've got in all different departments. All areas of the pitch we're well covered for and well catered for. And we're looking forward now to getting back playing football again.
Thanks, Paul. Thanks, Stefan. Next up, Philip Elcombe, if you want to put your question across.
Hello, can you hear me?
Yes, Philip, hi.
Hi. I think you've probably answered quite a bit of the questions. And firstly, thank you for this evening. It's very interesting.
No problem.
Once again, yes, transfer targets you've already answered. But the other question was, of the percentage, do we know what the club's going to get out from a pay-per-view?
No is the honest answer. Because, and I'll be very open with you. One of the problems at shareholder meetings is the complexity of these issues can sometimes sidetrack you into a debate that means you spend more time thinking about what each club is going to get out of it than actually making the decision in the first place. So we took a decision to, frankly, make the decision on what we were going to do. And then at some later point, we will worry about who gets what. But as I said before, my best estimations of what we might get out of it would probably cover the loss of revenue from 1.5, maybe 2 home games in total. And that's if we played out every game behind closed doors for the whole of the rest of this season.
All right, thank you. That's it, thanks.
No problem at all.
Great stuff, thanks, Phil. Next up, George Wells.
With fans, how can we help ourselves getting us back into stadiums? Is there anything we can do?
Well, you can certainly write and put some pressure on your local MP. I mean, I think, I've got to be honest that MPs across the country, in my opinion, have been shocking through this crisis in terms of their support for football. They're very quick to criticise football authorities when a football club goes bust, but we've got 90 odd football clubs that are not all on the verge of going bust, but all of them are suffering significant financial pressures, potential job losses, and a whole range of other issues. And local MPs are virtually silent. We're lucky, or in this part of the world, that, we've been able to engage Peter Kyle, the Labour MP for Hove, because we wanted to, frankly, use the opposition party to put some pressure on the government. So I've got a meeting due imminently with Keir Starmer directly to try and ask Mr. Starmer if he can help us put pressure on the government, not to put people's lives in danger, put people's health at risk, but to try and get some parity with other areas of the entertainment sector that, as you know, are beginning to see people back through their doors. And, I'm quite happy to put pressure on any MP, any part of government, any part of the opposition, to see if we can actually move the debate forward. We're not looking for state handouts. We're not looking for use of the furlough scheme. We've avoided all of those things. All we want is an opportunity to stand on our own 2 feet, by allowing our own supporters to come back and see their own team play in their own stadium. So anything you can do to write to local media, write to local MPs, write to the government directly, please feel free to do it, and you'll be doing so with our blessing.
Great stuff. Thanks, George. Sean Melody, you are next.
Hello, Sean.
Hi, Paul. Thanks for this. I just wanted to ask, in terms of the finances, what would the club make in a home game? What's the turnover?
Well, I can tell you what we would lose, or we are losing, from not playing behind closed doors. It's not quite as simple as giving a figure for what we would make or what we'd lose, because you've got to take into account player wages, in which case we're going to lose a lot of money every home game if you look at it like that. But in terms of the revenue that we're losing from not playing at the moment, it's well into 7 figures. So per game that we don't play with fans at the Amex, or any fans at the Amex, we're looking at a fairly significant 7-figure plus hole in our accounts.
For each game?
For each game, yeah.
Wow. Okay, thank you.
And just to give you some idea, as I said before, even if pay-per-view happened for the whole of the season and all of our games, let's just say we took an average of 12 games are normally on Sky Live or BT Live. So of the 26 fixtures that remain, I don't think the revenue that we would generate from pay-per-view would cover the cost of more than 1.5 or maximum 2 of those home games.
Great stuff. Thanks, Paul.
The headlines that this is a profit-making exercise, a profiteering exercise. Frankly, I do get frustrated because it is unfortunately nothing of a sort. It is plugging a very, very tiny part of a very large hole, and we only are doing it because we're not getting support from government to plug that hole in the way that we would most like to, which is to get our fans back in the stadium, have them enjoying their football, having them look forward to something at the end of a week. And we're being prevented from doing that for reasons which, on the face of it, are reasonable, but not when you consider what's happening in other parts of the entertainment industry, which I think is both unreasonable and inconsistent. And I don't think it's fair to our business or our sport or to our fans. And I've been outspoken on it so far, and I'll continue to be outspoken on it because I really don't think it's the right way to be consistent across an entire entertainment industry. And we're part of that, whether we like it or not. We're part of the entertainment industry. We're a major sport in this country. We're a major tax-paying industry, and we should be getting a bit more respect from the government at the moment.
Thanks, Paul. Tim Evans, you're up next.
Hi there. Hi, Paul. First and foremost, I think a big congratulations to the gesture. I think that's the right balance, and I think, certainly I really appreciate what you've done there. But the one thing I was just wondering would be this notion of the fact that, we're all season ticket holders. We've paid up for all of the home games this season. Would there be some sort of thought saying, well, okay, why don't you carry on the season ticket? But in this case, the season ticket is the pay-per-view games, so that we could actually take those games and actually have those as sort of credited via the season ticket, as opposed to sort of requesting, money back if you choose to do so.
It's a very fair question, and we asked the Premier League to look at a system like that. And unfortunately, the problem is it becomes very complicated for the broadcasters. First of all, they've got no way on, for example, a set-top box for you to put in your season ticket number to know that you've got a credit from the club to be able to get that game for free. That's the first issue. The second issue, that we've got season ticket holders, obviously, that are in households where there are multiple season tickets. So, would all fans, for example, in my next door neighbour that's a season ticket holder, with several season tickets, would they want 3 codes to be able to put the game in? No, they probably wouldn't. So then would we have to refund the other 2 people in the household to make it even for those season ticket holders to get the same benefit? It becomes very, very complicated. And I think one of the things we did all agree on was that it was much easier for each club to have a policy for their own fans that at least made good on the cost of a pay-per-view game if they choose to buy it. And if it then ended up with the season ticket holder slightly better off as a result, well, that's great. But it was a simpler way of doing it. I mean, what I would say is that there's no way that a pay-per-view game is in any way a substitute for being in the stadium. But it's one of those needs must things at this time. We can't get you in the stadium. and a pay-per-view game is the next best thing we can do, short of providing the game for free, which we can't do, and certainly not on a sustainable basis. We did it for 14 match rounds, the last match rounds of last season and the first few of this. But for clubs, it's not a sustainable thing to be able to do. It's the only thing ultimately we got to sell. If we don't sell our matches, then what have we got left to sell? So we've got to be very careful that we don't give away the very thing that actually creates investors like Tony in football clubs, because we need those guys, and we can't give away our football matches.
Thanks for that, Paul. Peter Jordan. Go for it, Peter.
Okay. Hi.
Hello, Peter.
Thanks, Paul, for this Q&A this evening. It's really much appreciated. You've probably got an awful lot in your play, and I sometimes feel as though you must feel as though you're damned if you do and you're damned if you don't, really.
It comes with the territory.
But no, a massive thank you for the gesture as well this evening. My wife and I will be looking at the prospect of trying to hold on to that the club can keep the money, and we'll cherry pick the pay-per-views, albeit that we're, like many, not happy about that situation, but that's the way it is, and we've got to work with that.
Thank you.
Also, really pleased to hear. Sorry, go on.
I was going to say, no. I want to make it very clear. It's not a gesture. It's something that is the right thing to do, and we have tried to get the timing of this as close to being as accurate as possible with the games we think you're likely to be able to see as we possibly can, without actually seeing what the government script is. So it's a bit like going to watch a film at the movies and trying to sort of work out when the most important part of the movie is, so you're not at the toilet at the same time. It's really difficult.
Sure.
It's really, really difficult to try and figure, frankly, a way through this increasingly complex situation that we're facing. And on the one hand, the way our season ticket payments work with the payment plan is that we're always going to be several months ahead. You're going to be always 7 months ahead of what you've paid for as opposed to what you see. But in this situation, I can't guarantee realistically that you're going to be able to see anything anytime soon. So rather than it being a gesture, it's absolutely the right thing to do, to put the money back in your bank account. If that then helps some of our fans pay for their pay-per-view games, great. If it means that they pick and choose, no problem, because they can use the money for other things. And if there are people fortunate enough to be able to leave the money with us, that does help us, and we're very grateful for that. But we don't expect that.
My question specifically is, and I know that you're really sort of working hard on our behalf about trying to get us into the stadiums again to watch the game, and massive thank you to the players and to Tony for keeping the ship afloat, and for all your team behind the scenes. But I'd be interested to know, you must have probably had dialogue with government officials on this, and I'm not sure whether you can answer this, but what do they say to you? Because nothing in it makes any sense whatsoever. People can sit, as we've all discussed this evening, inside theatres and other indoor areas, and every bit of your argument makes perfect sense. Do you think it's a trust thing?
Let me answer the question, I suppose, bluntly. Yes. I've got a slightly sort of privileged position in all of this, because I'm on the working party at the Premier League for the return of supporters. So I've been fortunate so far to meet the Secretary of State to discuss the issue directly. And I came away from the meeting pleasantly surprised that he seemed to be very open-minded that we could get fans back in the stadium sooner rather than later. This was back in September, shortly after we'd had the test event. I had two guests from the Department of Digital Culture, Media and Sport at the stadium on that day. Some people that were there might recall me walking around the stadium before the game with a lady who was a very, very senior official from the government, and showing her everything we were doing, how we were doing it. Supporters were coming up to us and saying how grateful they were to be back in the stadium. It was wonderful. She remarked consistently on how excited people seemed to be, how compliant they were with the requests that we made, how good-natured the atmosphere was. when we got in the stadium and she saw the way people were responsible in the way they queued to get food and drink, the way they distanced themselves when they were consuming the food and drink, when they went into the stadium bowl, how they stayed in the seating patterns that we prepared, how respectful people were to each other when they passed each other on the stairs and in the aisles. And I've got to be honest, I finished that game on such a high, not just because we got a late equaliser, but because I genuinely thought that I had made a real impact with the people that were going to go back to the Secretary of State and the Prime Minister directly, as they were, and report that this can be done. This is possible. You know, this football club has put its own reputation on the line to do this. They've put a huge amount of work into it. They've trusted their fans. They've trusted their fans to do everything that we ask you to do. They've done that. They've shown they can be trusted. And now, please give us the green light to take that 2,500 up to 5,000, or ideally a bit more than that. And I really felt I was on such a high on that evening. And I then met the Secretary of State. I reiterated everything that we'd done in the game. The lady that I've just been referring to was in the meeting. She confirmed everything. We produced a report that was this thick that went not only to the government, but to the Premier League, to the Football League or the EFL. It was made available to every club in the country so that they could learn from what we'd done. If they could improve it. If they had to alter it and amend it. And I just thought, wow, we're on our way. This is, and that's why I was so confident that we didn't need to make refunds in September, because I just thought, you know what, they've said to me that we think we can let you have some fans back in October, and this has now put the lid on it. It's going to actually happen. And so when the announcement came out a couple of weeks ago that we couldn't do that, I couldn't believe what I was hearing. And I appreciate that infection rates are rising all over the country, but particularly in certain cities. We always accepted that there might be times when certain cities might not be able to have fans in the stadium. But what I don't understand is how there can be a blanket policy across the country, which is inconsistent in itself against infection rates, but then different rules for indoor arenas, which arguably are more dangerous for people than external arenas. I don't understand it. I find it frankly insulting that our matches can be shown in private cinemas that can make money from our business and from you without our business benefiting from that. I find that incredible and insulting. But at the same time, I'm baffled by how the government have gone from where they were with us in September to where they are with us now. And there's been no explanation. And even the inconsistency of when I met the Secretary of State saying, and I understood this, that he was concerned about the increase in the numbers of people in the stadium from the test event because of the fears of what issues could be found on public transport. And we said, yeah, we understand that. What we would do is make the maximum amount of car parking available. We would put on extra park and ride buses. We would monitor the numbers of people on those buses so that we could distance people and therefore move people backwards and forwards from the stadium back to their cars safely. We would put people into their little family groups and I urge them to come in the same car. I had a question earlier from someone on email saying, why have you got people in groups of 5 in the season ticket ballot process? That was because we wanted to put the number of people in the average car in a group, so that if it came to it and the government linked capacity to car parking, we could then encourage people in their groups of 5 to come in one car as opposed to use public transport, etc. So, I felt that I'd answered everything to Oliver Dowden to the best of my ability. It was like being, given an oral exam at school. You're sort of answering questions without knowing what's coming next. And, I genuinely felt, not only myself, but Daniel Levy, who was there, Christian Purslow, who's the Chief Executive of Aston Villa, we all did our level best to convince government that that we were safe to go and that we would be responsible and that we wouldn't put people's health at risk. But now, here we are, we're in this situation. So I've got to try a different way. I've got to keep the public pressure on. I've got to try and get Keir Starmer engaged so I can pressure the government at a different angle. And I've also got to engage people like Peter Kyle locally to help me make this issue more high profile through different voices. And the trouble is, at the moment, sometimes I feel like I'm often the only voice who's either loud enough or stupid enough to put my head above the parapet. And that's frustrating as well. So I'm urging some of my colleagues to get out there and help us with this, because this isn't just the right thing for football clubs at our level. this is absolutely critical for football clubs at the levels below, because if they don't get fans back in the stadium soon, they will go bust. There is absolutely no doubt in my mind whatsoever. And that would be criminal. You know, I grew up watching Spurs, as everyone knows, but I also used to go and watch Leyton Orient play. A club like Leyton Orient is actually going to be in really big trouble if we don't actually get fans back in the stadium soon. And that's terrible, because that's a fantastic little club that's done an incredible job with their stadium, with their little training ground, with everything around it. But at the moment, they've got no TV income, no income from fans, and no income from match day events. I mean, it's a disaster. And if you extrapolate that up the league, that obviously the match day income isn't as important to us at the Premier League level, but for a club of our size in the Premier League, it's vitally important still. So we need it even more. And if you go up another level and you look at a club like Spurs, you know, they've just committed a huge amount of money to a new stadium based on the extra income they're going to get from a bigger stadium and a bigger capacity to repay the loan they've taken. So it's just as critical for a club of Tottenham's size to get people back in the stadium as well. So we're united on this, but at the moment we're banging our head against a very hard brick wall, and it's very frustrating and it hurts.
Great stuff. Thanks, Paul, for that. Jack Stevenson. Peter, I hope that answered your question. But Jack, if you want to go with your question.
Yeah, hi, Paul. The previous question did answer what my first part of the question was, but mainly about the test event, what it was put across the government, because I went and it was really good, and I can't understand why we aren't allowed to follow on. But the question was also about the pay-per-view and watching the games. So is there, I take it there's scope beyond November to look at carrying on putting them on pay-per-view. And the other part of the question was my flatmate is a Scunthorpe fan, and he gets it through the EFL player.
Yeah.
Is that to do with rights and that they own the rights to their game, or is that why they can't do a similar thing in the Premier League?
Yeah, it's a different TV contract for the EFL, and on what they've got is they've got the iFollow product that they'd already built into the TV contracts that they've got with Sky, and that game that they'll be able to buy on their iFollow streaming service is £10. But that's going to be for a single camera that simply goes like that across the pitch.
Very similar to our under-23 games, I think, for those of you that have watched it.
Yeah, very similar. For the Premier League pay-per-view service on BT and obviously Sky, that's going to be a minimum 8 to 10 camera production. So you're not going to notice too different to what you would normally see on a standard Sky production. You're not going to have a studio with pundits sitting in it, but you are going to have a commentator. You're almost certainly going to have an analyst sitting alongside the commentator, co-commentator, to dissect the game as normal. It will probably come on 10 to 15 minutes before the match is due to start, and it will then finish when the match is finished. But the quality of the production is, if this is the EFL product, this is going to be up here. So it's £4.95 more than that, and I'm not going to justify £14.95 because it's not my job to, and I don't like the price at all. But relative to what EFL fans are paying for £10 with one camera on a stream that might be juttery, I think that the Premier League's product, if I can call it that, forgive me, is actually going to be a lot better.
Thank you for that response. That answers my question on it.
Paul, just on that one as well, we got some free codes as season ticket holders last season, and a couple of people said, well, it was possible to do it then. I guess it's easier to do that with the streaming service to give away the free codes than what we're proposing here, where people are actually having to pay.
Yeah, as I say, it's a different kind of technology, and yes, again, we're not in control of it. So when Sky and BT say that they can't do it or they won't do it, we're not in a position really to argue, because we are not part of that part of the process. We're one removed. The Premier League deal direct with the broadcasters. We don't, and so we have to accept what we're being given in that situation.
Brilliant, thanks. Gerard Hudson, you are up next if you want to put your question.
Thank you. Good evening, Paul.
Hello, Gerard.
Consummate professional performance. Well done. Generally, Brighton have done brilliantly in all the things you've dealt with during the lockdown. I think it's fantastic. You obviously are aware, perhaps you or the club got a bit of stick at the weekend, and I think it was this EPL issue and the cost of it, and you've explained A, the price was not within your control, and B, that you had very little time in which to make a decision. You already said that board meeting was planned. Can I ask you though, did that weight of post emails, whatever, that you got at the weekend, did that affect how that board meeting went? You know, had the PP the issue, did that bring ahead the ideas about what you're doing about season tickets? I know it was on the agenda anyway, but did you get a feeling from that response this was actually a good time to do that anyway? Was there any link?
No, I mean, to be honest, we were very certain, to be perfectly honest, that we were going to agree at the board today to do what we've done. I think what happened on Friday demonstrated to us that there was an even more urgent need to do it if we weren't doing it. But, you know, these sort of things can't be dreamed up in a couple of days. You know, that this is a pretty complex refund mechanism that we put in place that you know, the team have been thinking about for a long time. As I said, we started thinking about, Jenny Gower and I started thinking about if and when we should be providing refunds literally from the end of last season, because it was pretty clear that, first of all, we were already sort of carrying over quite a bit of money for people that wanted it to carry on into this season. And then when it was obvious that we were going to start the season behind closed doors again, that was going to build up pretty quickly. So, you know, to be honest, Friday was a bit of a distraction to everything, because I was very frustrated by the way everything had gone on Friday in terms of the Premier League meeting, the Hobson's choice, the lack of control that we had on the process. It was either, well, if we don't do this, then fans won't see anything. And I felt, and I really do feel very strongly, that the least we can do is put fans in a position where they can see every game and give them the choice. If they can and are prepared to pay, that's their choice. If they can't or don't want to pay, that's also their choice. And if we could then somehow get our refund process to be aligned by today's board meeting so that people not only had the choice but the funds, then we've done the best we can for our fans. And I understand for some people the principle of pay-per-view is not a comfortable one. And I have to say, going forward, if the Premier League were to say now we're going to move totally to pay-per-view and you keep your own revenues, I'll be voting against it. Because we, as a football club, would lose out so massively that it would be, well, we wouldn't be able to compete. You know, Manchester United would Liverpool, Chelsea, Tottenham, Arsenal, they would literally sail off into the distance. We'd never be able to close the gap. So, you know, is this the thin end of the wedge in terms of pay-per-view? Not if I've got anything to do with it when I'm at this club, because it will put this club at a massive disadvantage. Is the price point right? No, I don't think it is. But is it right for now? Well, we didn't have any control over it. So it is what it is. And that's why it was so important to get the refund process aligned. But to be honest, this is the first board meeting we've had physically for over 7 months. So, you know, we've had to take advantage of the time of a board meeting. We don't call board meetings at 5 minutes notice. You know, they get planned and prepared for weeks and weeks and weeks in advance. So we always knew that at this international break, we'd have two options. We would have an option to provide a refund, because by then we either had fans back in the stadium and we'd be able to gauge how many and what the capacities were, and therefore what the likelihood of people being able to see 10 games or 15 or 4 or whatever it was going to be. And secondly, if fans weren't back, we could take stock of where we were and say, right, what do we think is going to happen in the next 2 or 3 months, and then make a judgment on whether money should go back immediately, or we should say, well, you know what, if fans are coming back next month, it probably doesn't make sense for us to give refunds, because we've got half of the season, and if we're starting next month, half of the season at least is still left, and therefore people are going to be square anyway. But, you know, as I said, I've taken a cautious approach in terms of, do I think fans are going to be back this side of Christmas? Probably not, although there's a chance before Christmas in December maybe. But if I look at it from a logical point of view, the NHS, winter flu, all the things that are going on, all the pressure points all over the country, no, it's more likely to be the new year. And if it's more likely to be the new year, we should get as much money back to you now as we can. And then we've got a little bit there. If we do get back in the new year, there's a buffer and we can go again. I hope that makes some sense. That's my logic. And as I say, you know, to me, it's logical, but I know that sometimes people don't think we think like fans. We do think like fans. We're all football fans, but we've also got to think like business people, because you want us to run your club sustainably, and it's important that we do.
Thanks, Paul. And yeah, I would back that up. I think we had a conversation Friday morning because the Argus had been on to us complaining on behalf of a fan, and we did ask the Argus to hold off till today when we felt we'd be in a position to give them a little bit more of a information and the answer that fan was looking for. So
before pay-per-view as well.
Yes, before pay-per-view. Yeah. So absolutely. Bill Jones, you are up next.
Hello, Bill.
Hello, Paul. Thanks for explaining all the pay-per-view and the refunds policy. My question's a bit of a longer term, when maybe the challenges of this season we're through the other side of it. And it's really what happens at the end of the current TV rights deal. I mean, one would hope for a united Premier League on this subject, but my feeling is that keeping fans out of stadiums and things like pay-per-view, quite a high price, drives fans towards maybe illegal streaming. And then we've seen some of the deals fall through, like the Chinese deal with Sky. And it makes me think that maybe, is it time for the Premier League to back an online streaming service, a kind of Premflix or Netflix for?
Yeah, I mean, it's certainly one of the options that we've got. I mean, it's a really complex situation, Bill. On the one hand, any kind of change to the way we sell things in the Premier League requires 14 votes. So that's quite a high bar to change. So if we, suddenly, for example, got pressure from the big six clubs to move to a pay-per-view only model because they knew that they would have many, many more fans than us that would pay it, and therefore their TV revenues would be up here and ours would be down here, then they would need the support of 8 other clubs to do that. By my reckoning, there aren't enough clubs with the size of fan base that the biggest clubs have got to make that worth their while. So I'm pretty confident that there wouldn't be a model shift in terms of pay-per-view on its own, or suddenly all clubs just sell their own TV. I'm pretty confident. In terms of whether the Premier League should do it themselves and work like some of the American sports where all the key revenues are pooled centrally and then distributed either equally or on a merit basis according to where you finish in the league, similar to what we've got now, then that would be one of the competitive opportunities that we've got next time we go to market. The challenge, I think, in the market itself is that there aren't that many other competitors that are queuing up to replace Sky and BT. And this is one of the challenges that we always have. Is Amazon going to come forward? Is Apple going to come forward? Is Netflix going to come forward? Is there going to be somebody from outer space that comes forward to suddenly buy Premier League TV rights? And the reality is, as much as we all think and love our country and love it for being what it is, it ain't very big. And there aren't that many broadcasters in this country that can pay billions of pounds for Premier League TV rights. So it is less than likely, I'd say, that you're going to see a new entrant coming in. I'd say it's too early for us to move to our own infrastructure as a league, because that will take quite a bit of setting up and quite a bit of a lead time to be ready. And the problem is, the broadcasters are not silly. If we threaten that we're going to do this on our own, we've got, I think it is about 18 months before the current deal expires. They're going to say, go on then, get on with it, good luck with that. Because they've spent 20 or 30 years building up the kind of infrastructure that delivers the quality of product that you see now. There's that word product again, but it is, in the broadcaster's term, a product. We call them matches, they call it their product. And that is what they're doing. They're talking about basically their product all the time. And we are that product. Our matches are that product. So my gut reaction is that we'll go to market. We will hope and to pray in this economic environment that there will be a new competitor somewhere that emerges. We'll hope and pray that Amazon want to take more games rather than less. We'll hope that Netflix suddenly decides that rather than have its own content, it wants our content. But am I confident about that? No, I'm not. Not right now.
Brilliant. Thanks, Bill. Russell, one of our friends from Seagulls Over London. You are up next. I think we've got a few more questions as well after you, Russell. I think we've got about 5 or 6 to come, just to so people got an idea on time.
Thanks for having me on. Just a couple of questions linked very quickly related to Project Big Picture, or Project Big Six, as I think it should be called. The worry I've got is that if there's a rejection by the rest of the Premier League clubs to this deal, which I think we should do because it's the wrong deal, what is your worries about the fact that you could get vilified by EFL clubs? What's your thoughts on that? Have you had consideration of how the reaction might be should you reject the plan as it's been proposed? And also linked to that, Greg Clark today has said that he participated in the early discussions related to this, but as soon as he found out that power and wealth were going to be the concentration of the issue, and a breakaway league mooted as a threat, he discontinued his involvement. So on those two subjects, I wonder if I could get your thoughts on that, Paul.
Well, first of all, Greg Clark was kind enough to call me yesterday lunchtime in the middle of our board meeting to explain the FA's position directly, because one of the other hats that I wear is as a member of the FA Council. So it was good of him to do that and could clarify what the FA's position was going to be. And it was absolutely that they wouldn't back these plans. And that's a really significant call that he made, because the FA has a golden share in the Premier League, which means that they can basically stop anything that hinders or harms the Premier League's own progress. So if someone wants to try and sort of turn upside down the constitution of the Premier League, the FA has the ultimate sanction and power to stop it. So to have them on side for this is absolutely critical, which is a big tick as far as I'm concerned. In terms of the EFL clubs, some have already started to try and lobby us. And you know, my answer is, when you receive a proposal that benefits effectively, let's call it 90, there are 90 clubs in this proposal that they would take care of. Well, when it benefits something like the vast majority of those clubs, of course they're going to be in favour of it. But the 11 clubs that it harms clearly are not going to be in favour. So, as I mentioned before, it would be a bit like asking a turkey to vote for Christmas. It's not going to happen. But, you know, I'm fed up with being put in a corner on situations which provide me with a Hobson's choice. And that might be one plan, but that's not the only plan. You know, I've been in football 25 years. I've seen lots of plans come and go to see a better and more equal distribution of football's wealth. All of them have had their merits, and all of them have had their demerits. This particular plan, in my opinion, has more demerits than it has merits. I actually can't find a merit at the moment. So from that point of view, you know, we just simply have to get back down and round the table and act like grown-ups. And rather than meeting in, you know, secret corner cafes and clandestine meetings in smoke-filled rooms, you know, let's get these issues on the table. Let's talk about them. You know, there aren't going to be many more important conversations over the next sort of 6 to 12 months for English football than finding a way of sustaining the pyramid. And, you know, we don't forget where we came from. You know, one of the attractions for me of joining Brighton was that I'd never worked in the Championship. I was really excited to see what that level of football was going to be like and how difficult it was going to be to get promoted. It was bloody difficult to get promoted. It's even more difficult to stay in the Premier League. So I'm hardly likely, and nor is Tony, to vote for something that makes it harder for us to stay in the Premier League and even harder to get back up if we were to get relegated. I mean, it's a bizarre thing to expect clubs like us to agree to. And I've got a lot of sympathy for Championship clubs, because I remember only too well how difficult it is to play in that division. But at the same time, as I said before, and I know it sounds selfish, and I don't like to sound selfish, but we have to look after ourselves first. And then once we are secure, as we can be, as we'll ever be in a competitive sport, then we can actually look further down the pyramid to see what we can do to help people. But it's no different than, as I said earlier, you know, someone coming to me to say, would you mind paying your next door neighbour's mortgage, when I can't pay my own mortgage? It's something I'd love to be able to do and help with, because I love my neighbours dearly, but not if it's going to put my own kids on the street. You know, it's one of those really difficult challenges that we have to face up to. But for me, there's a lot of talking to be done. It starts at 11 o'clock tomorrow morning. I wish I could offer you tickets to view what might happen tomorrow, but I suspect it's going to be a bit of a closed shop, I'm afraid.
Thanks, Paul. Tony Foster, I think he's up next.
Hello.
Hello, Tony.
Yeah, hello. So, you've got lots of letters complaining about pay-per-view, but actually, I think it's a very good idea. I used to live in Taiwan. I used to have a Premier League pass run by a New Zealand TV outfit. Unfortunately, they stopped as soon as we got promoted, but that was a very good service. You could even watch 6 games at once.
Yeah.
So, because it seems like even when we're all back in the stadium and everything's back to normal, only 3,000 fans can watch the away games.
Yeah.
So it's like flying planes with empty seats, and you could sell to. I'm sure you could sell to a few thousand to watch the away games, all teams, because frustrated Manchester United fans even can't go. They can't go to the game. They're not all of the games are on TV, so there's revenue there that you're not bringing in.
Yeah, you're right. The challenge with that is that one of the reasons that we command such a big premium for the TV rights that we currently get in the UK is because of the relative exclusivity of those games. So as soon as you actually start selling more of the games and the exclusivity becomes diminished, then the value drops. So what you'd have to be sure of in your scenario is that the value you lost from selling more games to the TV company so you could then sell for pay-per-view is then going to be recovered by the amount of pay-per-view revenue that you got. And that's not something that anyone's ever really tested. That's why in some ways, from a business point of view, and I know that's boring, it's quite interesting to see what the numbers are going to be like, because it will give us an indication for the first time ever as to how much we might affect the balance of power, if you like, between exclusivity of a small number of games or relatively small number of games versus having all games available for people to view. And of course, the other thing that's not normal at the moment is that we're not competing, if you like, with lower level clubs. So one of the big problems always of showing every Premier League game live, apart from the fact the fixture scheduling would be a little bit of a nightmare, is that we might then impact on audiences or crowds at lower levels of football, because people would stay at home to watch the biggest Premier League games live. And if they happen to clash on a Saturday afternoon, for example, with games at lower levels, then you would affect those gates, and therefore those clubs would start to shrivel and die. On top of that, you've also got the issue of people playing amateur football who might be dissuaded away from playing if there were more live games on, because they'd rather stay at home and watch live football than actually go out and play live football. And then on top of all of that, when you start messing around with the fixture schedule in the UK, and for example, you have games that would have been played at Saturday at 3 o'clock and then get moved to Monday at 5:30 as our West Brom game comes, then the value that we would have got for that game in the overseas market, let's say Asia, has completely been destroyed, because they would have been able to watch that game live at sort of 11 o'clock at night on a Saturday, which is, believe it or not, a great time in Asia to watch live football. Instead, they're now going to be served up that same game at 1:30 in the early hours of Tuesday morning, which no matter what country in the world you live in is a school night, and that's going to diminish their audience and therefore diminish the value of that game to those broadcasters. So we might gain here, but we might lose there. And it's a question of, what that balance looks like at the end of the day. As I said, it's a really complex model, this. It's not as simple as pay-per-view is the devil and everything else works around it. It doesn't work like that, unfortunately.
Thanks, Paul. Chris Jonas, one of our regulars on the Q&As over the course of the pandemic.
Hello, Chris.
Yeah, hi. And next week when Paul's joining us for Seagulls over London, hopefully. Thanks for putting your head up and above the parapet on behalf of the club and behalf of the fans as well to get us back in the stadium. And thanks for coming on again.
Not much left of my head after Friday. It's been shot off about 1,000.
Yeah. And yeah, thanks for getting the refunds done, because I think that is appropriate. And it was getting to the stage where I felt I had more money saved with you guys than I did in the bank. So
no interest. I know.
Exactly. But on that basis of money, if we do leave our money with you, it's been there a couple of times. I guess as an ex-banker, thinking as a fan, but as an ex-banker, how safe is it? What are you going to do with it? Some travel companies like Trailfinders put it in a separate trust account and that sort of stuff. How safe is it with you guys? Will it still be there next whenever we can start spending it again if we do leave it, or should we just take it out and keep it safe ourselves?
It's Tony Bloom you're dealing with. It's safe. From the point of view of what we do with it, we leave that money sitting in a cash flow which is marked refunds. So we don't use it because we don't believe necessarily that we're always, we're going to be in a position where we play out every game. So as far as we're concerned, it's not cash that we need to spend. It's cash that helps us with the flow of the business. But if at any point soon the government said, right, that's it, no fans in the stadium for the rest of the season, our immediate priority would be get the money back to you, and it would be there to do just that. So it's safe, the club's safe, Tony's safe. I keep a very close eye on it, as does my finance director, David Jones. And, we're very satisfied with the way we account for it. So, you can be absolutely sure that it's absolutely safe.
Thanks for the question, Chris. And I can verify that as well with Jonesy. There's no chance of a single penny of it being put at risk.
Enough getting him to pay for this pencil, let alone from you guys.
Absolutely, I can back that up. Colin Heritage, you are next.
Hi, Paul. Firstly, I'd like to express my appreciation for the job that you're doing and Tony's doing. I've supported the club for 50 years, and I think I'm watching the best Brighton team I've ever seen. So
thank you.
A lot of pleasure. Shame I'm not watching it live at the moment, but I'm getting a lot of pleasure watching this team. I wanted to ask you a football question, really, or transfer question. I guess there's two questions mixed up, really. One is in terms of a striker. To what extent has a decision been made not to go out and buy somebody else in the market because we've already got these very expensive players, big transfer fees were paid, they're on large wages. And then my other question is really, is Tony's longer term aim to try to make the club self-sufficient to the extent where all this investment in young players, understanding that while we could become a top 10 club, becoming a top 6 club is going to be somewhat more difficult, and therefore in the end, we're developing a model which is to buy good young players at a low cost, but then to honour them at very big transfer fees, a little bit like Leicester may have done with something like Chilwell lately, and obviously Harry Maguire and that type of thing, to effectively enable a club to break even by generating surpluses on transfer fees, but then using that money obviously to keep reinvesting. Is in effect that a model that Brighton Hove Albion is moving towards?
You've nailed it. Yeah. I mean, it makes no sense to spend 20-30 million pounds on a 29-year-old striker. It makes absolutely no sense, because by the time you've rolled in the investment into the wages, bearing in mind at that point you're buying an established striker who's going to be at the very top wage band for a striker in the Premier League, you're going to get absolutely zero resale value when that striker gets to the end of a 3 or 4 year contract. And most at that age wouldn't come for less than that. So you're effectively writing off the whole of the cost of the transfer, just writing it off. And that isn't a very good business model if you want to be a sustainable football club. It's a much better model to try and find strikers like Zakiri at 21 years of age, who we believe has got the potential to become that 28, 29-year-old striker worth 25, 30 or hopefully more millions of pounds, and be in a position where you can either keep that striker because he's scoring goals for you and is happy with you, or trade that striker so that you can then start to reinvest and build the model again. And if at the same time you're bringing players through your own academy, as we're starting to do, and people now are seeing that when we opened our academy in 2014 at Lancing, we're now beginning to see the production line beginning to push off players like Connolly, like Alzati, like Ben White, who are like Jason Malumbi, like Hayden Roberts, who are actually now beginning to see first team games on a very regular basis, or first team squads on a very regular basis, or are going out to championship clubs and not just being a bit part at that level, but being, like Jason Malumbi was for Millwall, a very significant part of their squad. So that's a much more sustainable business model, which will then get you down to a more sustainable football club, which will then reduce your reliance on Tony Bloom to continue to put in millions of pounds every year to balance our books. And to go back to your earlier point, yes, the trouble with the transfer market is it's not a surefire thing. You can invest 15, 16, 20 million pounds in a player, and they may or may not work. And the reason they don't work isn't because your scouts aren't very good or because the player isn't very good. It can be a whole range of different circumstances that mean a 20 million pound striker on a very significant salary, for whatever reason, just doesn't connect in the way that you expected him to. On the other hand, you can spend a fraction of that on a striker and they can connect almost instantly, and suddenly, you're up and running. The reality is when you're in the transition between the model that we've been in, where we had to spend significantly to establish a first team squad quickly for the Premier League, and where we want to be, which is a sustainable model where we're buying young and low and developing and then potentially trading high, is you've got to have a balance in the middle. You've got to have a blend, which is where we are probably right now, of established professionals and younger players, and then a coach that's prepared to create that blend as a mix of exciting football. And I think that we're at that stage, and we're still very early in the development of Graham's football philosophy. But I think fans now, after a year and a bit, have seen what Graham is trying to achieve. And he's trying to achieve that with a mix of established talent like Lallana, like Dunk now. We talk about Dunk's established talent, nearly established talent like Webster and Malpai, and Trossard possibly, and then the much younger group of Connolly, Alzate, Ben White, and others that are coming through. And that's a really exciting time for the football club, because not only is the football good and the blend really interesting to see, but we're starting to move along that model of being more sustainable. And we're going to be away from it yet, because it takes time to build that. But it was all part of the philosophy to bring in Dan Ashworth to blend that model for us, to find a coach that was prepared to work with young talent as well as established talent and mix them all together. And then for Tony to have the trust in the recruitment team that when we do go out and buy players that no one's ever heard of, and I see the emails come in, why have we spent money on Modo? No one's ever heard of him. Well, actually, Poland has heard of him, and they're a top international side, and he's a 21-year-old that nobody else in the Premier League has heard of until our scouts start looking, and then everybody starts looking, and then we're in a competitive situation. But what we don't do is we don't say, well, this is a striker that we're currently missing. Here's his dimensions. This is what he's looking for. Because as soon as we say that publicly, the price of anyone that fits that bracket goes up by 100%. So we would rather keep our powder dry and search for the talent that we're looking for according to Graham's brief quietly. And when we find it, we'll get the business done. If we can't find it, or we find it and we can't get it, we don't go public and say we didn't get a striker because he wasn't this and he wasn't that. We just simply wait for the next window and try again.
Thanks, Paul.
Really great question.
Yeah, absolutely. Ivor, you are up next.
Hi, Paul. Thank you very much. We all love talking football, and I'm reluctant, but I have a positive reason for dragging you back to the notorious 1495, and that's because I think you might be missing a trick. I think there's a positive aspect to this. At the moment,
could have told me on Friday. That would have been helpful.
Well, I've only just worked it out. After listening to you for an hour and 3/4, I think you're doing a brilliant job. However, right at the beginning, you said you've got no idea how much of the 1495 is coming to the club. And then about an hour later, you gave us you said, well, I reckon 1.5, 2 games a year it would pay for. So you do have some indication, some baseline figure that you think how much of that 1495 will come to the club.
I've got an indication based on estimates on the basis that the model is that everybody gets everything equally. What I don't know is what that model could end up looking like.
Okay, I appreciate that, but the positive spin I was going to suggest is most of us who reluctantly would dig our hands in our pockets if needs be, needs must, would be much happier doing it if we thought a significant amount of it or some of it was going to Brighton as opposed to going to Sky or BT Sport. At the moment, I think most people believe the money is going straight back to Sky and BT Sport, neither of whom would we regard as a worthy cause as much as we would regard Brighton. So would it not be an idea to give us some ballpark figure to indicate how much of our 1495 you think might be going to the club?
The honest answer is I don't know, because I don't know what the numbers and the balance is going to be, whether we're going to get 20,000 subscribers and Man United are going to get 500,000, how many times Man United are going to get picked, how many times we're going to get picked, whether when all the money's put in the pot, it's going to be chopped up equally, or whether there's going to be some weighting towards the clubs that have had more games or less games. So it's a complex picture. What I've done is tried to say, well, if there's an average number of fans for each game and it's divided equally, what would my share of that be? And therefore try and equate it to what it might be worth on a match-by-match basis. And that's literally doing that and trying to estimate. The reality is, because pay-per-view has been used so little in this country, no one really knows what the appetite is. And that's why the pricing is a bit weird, in my opinion, because I'd quite like to have started lower, got more people engaged and seen what happened. But of course, then the share to the clubs would have gone down. I mean, the one thing I would say is that for the broadcasters, putting on a 6, 8, 10 camera production of a Premier League game is a big investment. We're talking big 6 figures just for the production alone. And so from that point of view, there is a big chunk of cost in this for the broadcast. I'm not defending them because they can defend themselves, but I do understand that this isn't a straight, if it was $14.95 coming straight to Brighton, I think we'd probably all find a way to do it because it would help the club, but it's not going to be that. But on the other hand, I'm quite grateful in a way that Man United could end up with 10 or 12 pay-per-view games because they are going to get massive numbers of subscribers, and that's going to go into the central pot that hopefully we're going to get a share of. So it's slightly swings and roundabouts. As I said earlier, I feel slightly for the fans of our club and clubs like us, because on average we get 12 to 14 live picks a year on standard Sky and BT, and that's going to leave us potentially with 20 odd games on pay-per-view. But the reality is it won't be that number, because we only hope this is going to be in place for the next month or two, and then hopefully we're going to start to see fans coming back. Reality says that it's more likely to be in place until New Year, perhaps. I don't know. I genuinely don't know. We haven't even discussed beyond the next 2 months. But I would hope that by then we'd have a better idea of how it works and what the appetite is, and then we can go from there.
Okay, just one observation. I accept the complexity of it, but would it, in your next communication, I'm not saying do it specially, indicate that a share of this money will be going to the club?
Definitely. I mean, I can say that now. It will. I just don't know how much. And from that point of view, I don't know when we're going to get clarity, because, to be honest, that's the next battleground at a Premier League meeting, trying to work out how we divvy up this pool of money. And you're going to get, I'm sure, and I use Manchester United not because it's Manchester United, but they do tend to have a very, very large fan base. So they're going to argue that, yes, we're not on pay-per-view as much as you, Brighton, but we're bringing many, many more fans to the party, which you're going to benefit from in the central pool. So therefore you should take your share of having more games on pay-per-view. My argument's going to be, yeah, but hold on, my fans are paying for that. Our club's fans are paying for that. So, we're disproportionately affected in that way. So surely we should get a better share, which we can then take back into the club. And at some point in the future, when things hopefully get back to normal, we can use that revenue to keep prices of the tickets down and keep everything else down, and whatever we can do to help fans. So hopefully create a little bit of a circular argument. But it's going to be an interesting month or two, is the honest answer, to see where we get to with that one, because we're a long way from agreeing how that might look.
Thanks, Paul, and thanks Ivor for
a very good one again.
Ian McCulloch.
Well, first of all, thanks very much for this, and I say to all my friends in football, apart from the football itself, I know I'm with the right club because I'm very impressed with everybody, with Paul and Dan and Tony, and so great. 3 things, and I think a lot of it's been covered. First of all, just going back to this big picture, the meeting tomorrow, if the vote goes against the big picture, is that the end of it? From the point of view at this stage?
There won't be a vote tomorrow, thank God. I've had enough of votes in the last few days. It will be more, I think, a discussion on, to be honest, how did this come about? Why weren't all clubs consulted? Who was involved? Who wasn't involved? Why were you involved? Who said what to whom? So a little bit of I think an airing of dirty linen, hopefully in private, but inevitably it'll be public, I'm sure. I think it's really the first sort of the first sort of shots in what will be a long and drawn out sort of battleground, to be perfectly honest. So I think we need to hear, as I said earlier, what everybody has to say. I'd like to think I was fair, and at the moment, aspersions are being cast to the red half of the northwest of England, and as a consequence, the red mist, if I can call it that, has come down on the rest of us, and that might or might not be fair. But we need to ask those clubs that are alleged to be involved whether they have been involved, and if they have been, why, and why do they think that we would be supportive of such a plan that has emerged. So that's the first part of it, but we'll see where we go after that.
Great stuff. Thanks, Paul. John, next.
Oh, hi, Paul. I didn't know. Yeah, thank you very much. First of all, that was an amazing explanation. My brain's hurting just listening to it all. So how you manage it, I don't know. I was just going to go back to one of the earlier callers where you encouraged us all to write to our local MPs. As a club, obviously, we've got a unique experience of the power of fans. And I've always been a believer in the power of fans. And I don't know if you're aware that there's a debate, what do you call it, when they petition being gone round, and it's already had 200,000 signatures. And once it gets past 100,000, I understand that the government have a legal obligation to have a debate in the House of Commons.
Yeah.
That was on the subject of just the suggested mishandling of this whole coronavirus, which I think you've alluded to as well. Has any thought been given for the football family as a whole, all 92 clubs, to make available via their databases and social media a similar petition to be drawn up, because the numbers would be in millions? And I wondered whether that's something that's been considered.
I think we've got that going already, Paul, isn't there? There's one out there that is forcing government to relook at the issue of return of fans.
I actually believe that Oliver Dowden commented on it yesterday on BBC Breakfast, and it prompted him to make the comments he made on BBC Breakfast yesterday. So I believe that was on the back of that petition. Obviously, if you can get fellow fans to sign it, great. It keeps the pressure up. Write to your MPs, etc., etc. Had a conversation with some colleagues at the Premier League today, and they are now starting to encourage Premier League clubs to do that, EFL clubs as well. But obviously, as Paul alluded to at the start, it's more difficult where obviously they're facing more challenging and more difficult times than perhaps we are at this moment.
I think the one thing I'd say, John, is that the reason why asking fans to do what they can is important is because it's one thing us saying to government, we want our business back, but it's another thing fans saying we want our football back. At the end of the day, the power of fans is evident within this club for obvious reasons, but I think you're also part of the electorate. And if MPs start to think that you're getting fed up with them for not supporting their constituents or their local football club, then all of a sudden my belief is that they'll start to take action pretty quick. And it doesn't matter whether they're blue, red, green, whatever colour they happen to be, they don't want to lose their seat, because losing their seat is losing their job. So from that point of view, as I said earlier, I've always been lucky in Brighton that the 8 years I've been with the club, Martin Perry has been around to deal with all of the local politicians and government. I have no time for politicians or government. I just want to run a football club as best I can. But now, with Martin retired as of a few days ago, and this issue being so important to us, I've waded into it. And I have to say, I now know why I stayed out of it for 8 years, because it really, really hacks me off. And I just hate the inefficiency, the inactivity, and the lack of understanding of how important football clubs are for communities up and down the country. And it really, really gets my goat. So I must admit, I am frustrated with the whole thing at the moment, but I've got a lot of support and a lot of faith in our MPs locally. And they've been very helpful to put me personally and in some cases other colleagues of mine in front of pretty prominent government and opposition leaders, which is really, really good. And I'm looking forward to putting our case to the opposition and seeing if they can apply some more pressure to government.
Thanks, Paul. And one other thing that I think we've discussed and I think is relevant John, to that point, is a lot of those MPs that won seats at the last election did so on in swing seats maybe, and those majorities might be eroding. So I think any pressure that football fans can apply up and down the country, we've done it before as Albion fans on a more local level when we were trying to get back to Withdean and over the new stadium. So we know how it works. We know it works. It's definitely worth writing to MPs and trying to apply that pressure. And also, you mentioned Martin Perry there. Great opportunity to plug the podcast that came out at the end of last week with Adam Ty. Fascinating listen with Martin. And I learned loads of things I didn't know about Martin. And I worked with a guy for 20 odd years. So definitely would recommend that. Talking of old friends, Kevin Smith, one of my old North Stand Goldston colleagues. You're up next, my friend.
Kevin, you look a lot longer than Paul Camlin, so I can't believe you were at the Goldston.
He was.
Yeah, I'm a tad older, sadly, but there you go. Just a couple of questions. One's quite a curious one. You mentioned that new TV deal. If it went full pay-per-view, that Man United, etc., will be up here and we'll be down here. And you said, in your current guise, you would have to vote against it. If you were, say, CEO at Man United, Liverpool, what way would you vote? You for that?
It's a good question, because that's the whole dynamic of the Premier League. Because even if I did vote for it, I would need 13 other clubs to be with me. So, again, I know that this week that people sort of, were concerned that this might be the thin end of the wedge and that we might be sliding towards something that was disadvantageous to us. But, what you can only do, Kevin, is you can only focus on the club that you're responsible for. So, as I said before, I can't speak for Leicester and what they did. I can't speak in other votes that we've had for what other clubs have done, because in those situations, you have to vote for what's good for your football club at that time, having weighed it all up. And we always try, Tony and I always try to say, we vote for what's right for our club first and foremost, because we have to. But where we can always vote for the greater good of football, we will do that as well. And, sometimes those two things coincide very neatly, and thank God they do. And sometimes that they don't. That's where the situation becomes tricky. If I was back in my Tottenham days, I may well have a very different view of pay-per-view. But, again, I'd be thinking about my club and what I had to do for my shareholders and my fans and my stakeholders. At Brighton, my 100% focus is not deflected by the noise from Big Six clubs. They're not my concern. My concern is this football club and making sure that our owner is protected and you fans are properly represented where we can. And when we make a decision that is borderline, is it in the fans' interest, isn't it? The very least we can do is front up to it and explain it carefully and reasonably. And over the weekend, there's lots of emails flying around, emotions are high. In that situation, you're always slightly on the back foot because, as we said earlier, we only got news of what you got a very short time before you did. So at the time when we're getting hammered by emails and people want to know this and why that and why not this, and you're charging us twice and that's not fair and you're a capitalist this and you're a pig that, all those things combine, and you need just that little bit of breathing space to say, look, this is what we're trying to do and how we're trying to do it. I'm sorry it's long-winded, but that's how it is on a long email. And then what we're going to do is we're going to spend the next 2 or 3 days processing this. And then when we get with our managers and our directors, then we can make some decisions based on this. But sometimes, unfortunately, because of the world we live in, people think we can make instant decisions based on something that happened an hour ago to us and half an hour ago to you. And that's very, very difficult sometimes. And, inevitably, people's emotions run quite high because in this world that we live in, people expect instant answers to complex questions. And I wish I had the brain capacity or the intellect to be able to say, yep, I've got it all. I know what I'm going to do, and that's what I'm going to do now. But the reality is that you have to process every bit of information that you have available and then consider it, go away, talk to people, make sure that what you think you should do is what you should do, and then move forward as we've done today with a more considered answer to everybody's questions. And sometimes you can do that in a few days as we have done with a lot of background work that went before it, thank God. And the timing of the board meeting could not have been better to get us to this position. I don't know what Man United will do, or if I'd have been at Man United, what I'd have done on Friday, or what I might do tomorrow. But I do know that I'd rather be sitting where I am today than where Man United's chief executive is ahead of tomorrow's meeting.
Thanks, Paul. Thanks, Kev, for the question. I think you'd probably listen to the Man United fans, and given what the Big Six have come out and said today, be interesting to see what those 6 clubs do. Andrew Garfield, you're up next.
Yeah, with everything that's kind of going on in the world at the moment, just want reassurance that the club is going to be safe, and obviously you're going to do everything to kind of keep the club afloat as much as you can, really.
Yeah, you've got that total reassurance, Andrew, and you know, it is a difficult time. And you know, we are in the fortunate position, I think, at the worst of times to be in the best of leagues, despite all of the big picture noise or whatever it's called in terms of this project. But you know, we are fortunate that we've got the TV revenues to pay the majority of our bills. I mean, we're going to lose a lot more money, as you'll see in a couple of weeks' time when we announce our accounts for last season than we hoped and expected. And we're already going to lose more money this season than we hoped or expected, because it's just going to be impossible for us to catch up if we lose half a season without fans again. So, you know, despite that, we've got a great owner. We've got someone who's absolutely prepared to put his money where we need it, when we need it. But of course, at the same time, as I said, from the day I joined the club, really, we've got to shield Tony and protect Tony from as many of those and as much of those losses as we possibly can. Because even the wealthiest people eventually get to a point where they start to question how much money that they're losing in one particular business. So, you know, as much as sometimes probably people hate me for it, I have to take decisions that protect Tony as far as I possibly can. And, you know, I do every single one of those decisions with the support of a very good senior management team, but also with the support of the board. You know, these aren't unilateral decisions that Paul Barber takes because Paul Barber thinks he knows better than everyone else. It's Paul Barber recommendation on the back of discussions with his management and on the back of discussions with his board, and that board includes Tony. So from that point of view, you know, everything we do, we try and do in a very fair and considered way. And that's all to make sure, to your question, that the club is safe and it is sustainable, and we do move as quickly as we can out of this mess to a slightly brighter place that we can all get back to a little bit of normal, which we'd all enjoy.
Thanks, Andrew. Good question. Yeah, here, I would echo that. I think you're in very safe hands. Adam Walker, you are next, and then you're our penultimate guest asking a question. We have one more after you.
Hello, Paul. Good evening,
hello, Adam.
Everyone. I wanted to preface my question by firstly saying I think you're doing a wonderful job, Paul. I think the club is magnificent, and as a lifelong season ticket holder and you know, a fan of the club, I think this evening just reinforces, as someone else said, what a fantastic ambassador for the club you are, and you continue to be so. It pains me to have to ask this question, but I have to ask this question, and I think you know what I'm going to ask you, Paul. So we've had some correspondence over the last few weeks with regards to my parents and their season ticket. My father is registered disabled, and they've been shielding since the beginning of March. And my loyalty, whilst I am loyal to the club, of course my loyalty is to my parents. And on behalf of them, I wanted to ask the question really around why the decision was made to insist on people that were shielding to still continue with their requirement to pay their season ticket, even though they were unable to attend the game and unlikely to be able to attend the game. And I should also overlay that by saying my background is in clinical research, and I work in drug trials, and I have done for 25 years. In my experience, I've never seen a drug come to market in less than 8 years. And as a reality check, I really don't feel that we are likely to be, in a broader sense, rid of this virus for a number of years. And that's just my absolute experience in working in clinical research. So there's a couple of points there. One is, obviously, we'd all love to get back to some sense of normality, but the reality is that I think this is going to be with us for quite some time. I know you're running a business and you're doing a great job, But at the same time, my as I said, my loyalty is to my parents. I just wanted to ask the question why there was not more consideration given to those that were shielding and vulnerable and unable to have a voice for themselves potentially in considering some of the the renewal and the money and obviously I do appreciate the fact that you are offering that refund to people who have been paying their season tickets at this time. I think it's only fair and right. I'll let you speak.
Sure. First of all, Adam, it's a very, very fair question, and I'm really sorry to hear that your parents are in the situation you're in. But both of my parents are suffering from cancer at the moment, and they're both in their 70s, and I know what it's like and how worrying it is for you as a son. So I'm really sorry to hear that they're going through it as well. To be perfectly honest, we had to draw a line somewhere in the sand as to how we were going to try and deal with the situation we were facing. And one of the things I've used several times, both on these forums and with the media particularly, is unfortunately I don't have a script on how best to manage the situation that covers every single eventuality. And so what I try and do is to look for, I suppose, guides from various places as to what the fairest and best thing to do is, balancing the needs of supporters and the club. And on the medical issue, we decided that when the government released the actual policy that meant people of a certain age with certain conditions had to shield, we took the guide of those people that still had to shield as those that would get the priority when it came to refunds early, or whether it was fair or reasonable to ask them to continue to pay their season tickets. But we always had in our minds that for those people that were not in that ultimate category where they got a letter from the government, that there would be enough flexibility in the policy that we put in place. So initially the payment holiday, then the opportunity to opt out of 6 games, then the ballot process, which would probably mean that with the best will in the world, they would only get a fraction of games in which they were successful. And if they were successful and still didn't want to come, then the season ticket exchange, because there would be more people that did want to come than didn't want to come. And therefore, in the worst scenario, those people that were not in the highest category of shielding, but were still vulnerable, could still keep their season ticket for next season if things got better. But at the same time, were very, very unlikely to be financially out of pocket, either by the end of the season or, as we've got to now, mid-season, because we'd be giving them a refund. And the problem I had, Adam, was that I couldn't communicate any promises at that stage because I just didn't know where the thing was going to go. And we tried to therefore keep it as simple as possible, because as soon as you say anyone can have a refund, then unfortunately you get a situation where you start to have to become almost a judge and a jury on whether someone deserves a refund. And who are we to decide whether someone's more clinically vulnerable than somebody else? So the only people that could really tell us was the government policy, and that's why we relied on that. Now, as it's turned out, I think people like your parents are going to be in a situation where not only will they get the majority of their money back for this season anyway, that by the time we get back into stadiums, the chances are that they might be lucky in the ballot, in which case they can put the tickets back on the exchange, or if they're not, they're going to get a refund. And if they get to the end of the season, they haven't been to any games and they can't go next season, we can refund them completely anyway. So I don't think financially your parents are going to be in a bad situation. What I'm really sorry about is that they've had worry in the meantime that's caused them stress that they really don't need. And all I would say, and I know it's difficult and it's easy to say, but they are always welcome to pick up the phone to me, and I will explain to them, where we are and how we are and what we're trying to do. And hopefully it will be to reassure them that we're not looking in any way to exploit their situation. Quite the opposite. We've got a huge amount of people in a similar situation. And when we've spoken to them on the phone and explained it, they've been really understanding of our position and said, okay, look, we trust you to do the right thing. We don't know how to use this ticket exchange thing, but if we do win the ballot, will you help us? And of course we will. We'll make sure that their ticket, goes into ballot. I know I've got 4 or 5 people in my road that are club members that are praying that people like your parents put their ticket into the ballot, into the exchange after a winning ballot. So I'm pretty confident, as I possibly can be, that they're going to be fine. And I'm just sorry that they went through the stress that they did.
As I say, it pains me to bring this to everyone's attention, because, as I say, for my entire life, I've never had a bad word to say against the Albion until now. And so it's not an easy question to raise. But as I say, I really appreciate everything that you and everyone at the club are doing. I know these are really challenging times. You know, there is so much uncertainty around outside of football and in everyday life. And as I say, I felt I needed to ask the question tonight. I appreciate your honesty and your openness, and I will pass that back to my parents.
Yeah, please wish them well for me, Adam, as well. If they do want to have a chat on the phone, Paul's got my number. Hopefully you've got my number. Please ask them to give me a call. I'm happy to have a chat. I enjoyed quite a lot of chats with people in a similar situation to your mum and dad during the lockdown. I learned a lot actually about the club from making those calls. So if I do get a chance to speak to them, I'd be delighted to.
Thank you. And to be quite frank, you know, it has been a lifeline for them when they were able to go to the ground. And the care and attention that they get at the ground through the stewarding has been magnificent. You know, they were in the southwest corner, and it is beyond measure.
That's brilliant. Well, I can tell you one thing. We're planning to have about 100 fans as our guests for one of the games that we play at the Amex, just to almost highlight how ludicrous it is to have people in the stadium in a lounge watching a game on a screen when the game's being played behind them. So if they're up to it and they're well enough, your parents are welcome to be my guests on that evening and come and enjoy a bit of company with some fellow Albion fans and come back to the stadium for that.
That's a very kind offer, and I'll pass that on to them. At the moment, as I say, my dad hasn't left the house since the beginning of March, since before lockdown. I'd love to be in a position where I can bring them along safely. But as I say, I just personally and professionally don't feel that we're going to be there for quite some time.
I understand. Well, good luck to you, Adam. Thanks.
I really appreciate that. Thank you so much, Paul.
No problem.
Thanks, Adam. Thanks for the question, and I'm glad you got the answer there. Final question of the evening, Nadir, drawing us to a close. Thanks for everybody's patience as well. We got through a lot of questions, and thanks to Paul as well for over 2 hours, 15 minutes. So, Nadir, over to you to close us off.
Nadir, prime spot. Everyone else has been a warm-up act.
I know, everyone's asleep by now, I bet. Cool. So, yeah, just had a question in regards to big picture. So, for the last God knows how many years, you know, clubs in the EFL are going out of business. Everyone's saying, you know, why don't the Premier League teams dip into their pocket and pay this and pay that to save them? We've seen as part of big picture that we're kind of anticipating, you know, a £250 million bailout, loads more TV money. But then you kind of look down the pyramid and you see teams like Reading, their wages to turnover is like 235% or something like that. What's there stopping teams receiving all this money as a bailout, saying thank you, and then just, you know, going out and spending more money? Because I think, you know, we all feel for the EFL. We need to try and support them as much as we can. We've been there for a very, very long time. You know, otherwise, you know, without a good FFP system in place, it's just going to get worse. Even if we give them more money, they're just going to spend more. What are your thoughts on that and how we can kind of improve the situation?
Again, it's another really astute question, because that's one of the concerns that we've got with a blanket bailout, is that you could be giving or throwing good money after bad, because if you give more money to bad owners or bad chief executives and they waste it, it won't bail out the club, it will just take them deeper into the mire. So, you know, our questions have been, I think, quite reasonable. You know, we got promoted out of the Championship by not breaking FFP, we didn't break any rules, we live within our means, albeit that we're very fortunate that Tony was able to help us with that. But it was still within our means, within the rules. And the problem is you've got a number of clubs that are sort of shooting for the dream, and they're not living within their means. And therefore, in some cases, they're breaking rules, and you've seen punishments for that. And our concern is that we would then be funding further encouragement of that kind of behaviour. On the other hand, you know, we're then torn because there are other clubs that are very, very well run, and they work wonders, frankly, with the income they have and the budget they have and the competitiveness that they have as a result of that. And they do need our help, and they do need some support. So, you know, we keep pushing our colleagues at Premier League and the EFL to try and give us some kind of sense of how this money, if we were able to vote to give it over, would be used, and for what, and by when, and what would the restrictions be, and is it a gift or is it a loan? If it's a loan, does it have interest? If it has interest, is it paid back over 5 years or 10 years or whatever? So all we're looking really for is some kind of sense that the money, if we were to vote to give it over, was going to be used in the right way. And in our minds, the right way is making sure that those communities still have football clubs in 5 years' time and in 10 years' time, not in 5 months' time. And the only thing that kind of tears me apart on that one is that we can't debate this for too long. Because if we debate it for too long, those clubs won't be here to worry about in 5 years. They'd have been gone already. So, the sad thing about this big picture project, whatever it's called, is that my fear is it's going to become a distraction at a time when the EFL clubs least need us to be distracted. We need to focus on our own business and what we can do to sustain ourselves. And once we've done that, and as quickly as we can do that, we've then got to give them some help if that's what we can do. But the longer we debate this nonsense of restructuring the game at the worst possible time in football history, probably, then we're gonna take our eye off the ball, and that really worries me.
Brilliant, thanks, Paul. That's the last question of the evening. Thanks to everybody for attending. Thank you for your time. I don't know if you've got anything further you'd like to add or say ahead of obviously an eagerly anticipated game of football on Sunday. We've got we're playing in a week when we play Crystal Palace, and nobody's even mentioned it till now.
Well, look, the only thing I would say is, first of all, thank you very much to everyone for joining us for tonight, but more importantly for your patience over the last however many months it's been since this nightmare began. I think it's coming up 7 or 8 months now since we first got wind of the virus heading our way at the end of February. And we're really grateful for the patience and support that we've had. We're really grateful for the way in which so many fans have just simply left their money where it is. The number of emails that we've had questioning where the money is and what we're going to do with it and when the refund is coming has been very, very small. And I realised that the pay-per-view was like an incendiary device being thrown into the whole process of what you've been going through as supporters. But hopefully you've seen today that we've had a plan, we've waited for the right moment to execute the plan, we've tried to get as much information as we could, we've tried to make sure that we've been as fair as we could, we've tried to cover every eventuality, but at the same time, we've also tried to support and protect the football club and our owner from as much pain as possible during the process. But the most important people are you, the fans. We're very conscious that everybody's got a lot of pressures at the moment, a lot of worries, and hopefully what we've done today will ease those worries a little bit, and that we can get 3 points on Sunday and look forward to a very nice week after that. But thank you very much for your time tonight.
Brilliant. Thanks, Paul, and thanks again to everybody for tuning in.